There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Sean Breeze Books. Welcome back to my channel and the first book haul of 2025. I don't think any of these books were acquired in 2025, but this is the first one I'm doing for the year, and I'm doing it with my new computer, and I'm pleased with how all the new stuff, the webcam and blah blah blah, works. However, there are certain books that are blurry, and so I've been playing around with that, but most books show up well. If a book is blurry when I'm editing, I'll paste a GIF over it, but for that, other than that, tiny little glitch, I'm pleased. And this will be quite unusually, of late, a wine-infused book haul. Without further ado, here's I think a dozen books, something like that. Here is a book that I have been meaning to read forever, and the first step I finally took, which was to acquire it. It is called Sea of Poppies by Amitav Ghosh. It's a modern classic of Indian literature, first put on my radar by the wonderful Irish novelist Kaveri Madhavan. And every time I have her on my channel, she says, "Have you read that yet?" No, not yet. But anyway, so this is one of his most well-loved books, as far as I understand, 2008, and set in India in the 1830s, at least in part. It's got a lovely map, and here is the first two short paragraphs. The vision of a tall-masted ship at sail on the ocean came to Diti on an otherwise ordinary day, but she knew instantly that the apparition was a sign of destiny, for she had never seen such a vessel before, not even in a dream. How could she have, living as she did in northern Bihar, 400 miles from the coast? Her village was so far inland that the sea seemed as distant as the netherworld. It was the chasm of darkness where the holy Ganga disappeared into the Kalapani, the black water. It happened at the end of winter, in a year when the poppies were strangely slow to shed their petals. For mile after mile, from Benares onwards, the Ganga seemed to be flowing between twin glaciers, both its banks being blanketed by thick drifts of white-petaled flowers. It was as if the snows of the high Himalayas had descended on the plains to await the arrival of holly and its springtime profusion of color. That's quite beautiful. Here is a work of non-fiction that is kind of obscure but interesting to me. It is called Decadent Women, Yellow Book Lives by Jad Adams. What is it all about? It's part literary history, part social history, and it's a study of all the women who contributed to the groundbreaking Fin de Siècle magazine called Yellow Book. And the female authors that wrote for this journal, the Yellow Book, range from well-connected and fashionable aristocrats to the desperately poor. That does sound very interesting, and I don't know how academic it's going to end up being, but there are some pictures, and let's see how it opens. This was published last year, I think, was it not? 2023. The opening paragraphs don't really have a standalone vitality, so I won't read them, but it does sound quite interesting. Here is a book I'm dying to read that came out last year. It is a queer Welsh novel, Above Us the Sea by Ania Card. Look at that cover. Oh God, when am I going to find time to read it? I've just been dying to read it. It's about a love triangle in Cardiff, a younger guy and an older couple. One is a retired Welsh boxer. The other is a Polish photographer. And plot ensues. But oh, that just sounds amazing. 2024, the press is called Dead Ink, and Ania Card grew up in southeastern Poland before coming to the UK. She lived in Cardiff and London before moving to Brighton. Yeah, it's set in Wales. She is a very interesting sounding writer, and the first section is called It's My Picture Before I Got Old, and then chapter 1, 8 months before December 2013. I think that means 8 months before, which is December 2013, but I'm not sure. Here's the first couple short paragraphs. I first met Gav 3 years ago on the dance floor of Pulse, Cardiff's loudest gay bar. Gav's face flickered in the whooping disco lights, and his body whirred into dance to the sounds of Divine. A lithe body wrapped tight in a velvet red turtleneck and black leather trousers, unrestricted in a spectrum of motion drawing men around him close. I admired the freedom in his movement, free from all of his dancing, free from our eyes on him. His face drowned in sound, eyes closed, lips mouthing the words with a smile as if he had never danced before. And the dance was the answer. It was all there was. I said I was going to read you the first two, but that has this lovely standalone vitality, so I'm going to stop there. Oh my God! Here is some remedial reading that I need to do. This is a work of Indigenous history, very contemporary history, a non-fiction book by an important Indigenous journalist from 2017. It is called Seven Fallen Feathers, Racism, Death, and Hard Truths in a Northern City by Tanya Talaga. I am actually very slowly doing an audio text combo of her 2024 book, The Knowing, and I haven't read this. I can tell you what it's about from memory. I've heard so much about it. It is about this is a true story, one of Canada's many shames about the way we torture and kill our Indigenous peoples. 7 Indigenous high school students disappeared without a trace over a decade, from 2000 to 2011. And they died in Thunder Bay, Ontario. I believe at that time Tanya Talaga was a local reporter, but I'm not sure of that part. It's a work of investigative journalism showing that all of us Canadians are responsible for their murders because of what we allow to happen to them and what we make happen to them. And it's an incredibly important book that I must read. I will read one of the epigraphs because it's from the summary of the final report of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and it's about cultural genocide, which is very relevant to all Canadians, who most of us keep our head in the sand about it, but that's what we are perpetrating on Indigenous peoples, and here is a paragraph about that. Cultural genocide is the destruction of those structures and practices that allow the group to continue as a group. States that engage in cultural genocide set out to destroy the political and social institutions of the targeted group. Land is seized and populations are forcibly transferred, and their movement is restricted. Languages are banned. Spiritual leaders are persecuted. Spiritual practices are forbidden, and objects of spiritual value are confiscated and destroyed. And, most significantly to the issue at hand, families are disrupted to prevent the transmission of cultural values and identity from one generation to the next. In its dealing with Aboriginal people, Canada did all these things. And we're not doing all those things now, but we're not, as a nation, doing enough to come to terms with it and mitigate it for the current generations. And we're still perpetrating a lot of it, far too much of it. And I think that's a good enough introduction to it, with that thing about cultural genocide. But yeah, this is a book that, it's a shame. I'm embarrassed that I haven't read it yet, because it's a book that all Canadians should read twice a year. Here is a book that came out with quite a splash last year. It is the latest from Andrew O'Hagan, the Scottish author, Caledonian Road. He wrote Mayflies, which I loved in a complicated way. And this is, I think, his first tome that I know of. It is almost 650 pages. I guess the protagonist, or one of the protagonists, is an art historian and celebrity pundit entering the empire of middle age. What else would you need to know about it? The epigraph is from Robert Louis Stevenson. Of course it is. Scottish author. After a certain distance, every step we take in life, we find the ice growing thinner below our feet. And all around us and behind us, we see our contemporaries going through. Huh. It's got a cast of characters that's 2 pages long, so that's going to help me. I'll read the opening paragraph. Tall and sharp at 52, Campbell Flynn was a tinderbox in a Savile Row suit, a man who believed his childhood was so far behind him that all its threats had vanished. He had secrets and troubles, yet out of the cab window, St. Paul's was shining on Ludgate Hill, and the angels of London were on his side. On reaching Shaftesbury Avenue, he inhaled his own scent, the faded peaches of Mitsoko, and looked up at the buildings. A reborn dream, the Marquis said above Les Miserables, and he enjoyed the sensation of applause. Oh, the progress of guilt and vanity in the average white liberal of today. Campbell didn't take people half as seriously as they took themselves, which was the first of his huge mistakes, the second being the proof copy he carried that day in his briefcase. So that is a tour de force of an opening paragraph. Oh, my God. The next one, there's a story about a project that I will be undertaking for the next 5 years, probably. This is going to be a long-winded explanation. I have things to tell you about myself that are related to this next book. I freaking hate Persephone books because of the ugly gray covers. They're so freaking boring. But every once in a while, they put out one that has a nice cover that isn't ugly, gray, and boring. And here's one. This one is hard to get into focus. Someone at a Distance by Dorothy Whipple. I have enjoyed one of her novels that I read before in an ugly gray Persephone edition, but I think about it all the time, so it made more of, I think that was called The Priory, yes, from 1939, and this is her final novel from 1953, and I was willing to buy it because this is quite a beautiful cover. I wish Persephone would wake up and smell the coffee and put nice covers on all their stuff. They always have... Oh, and now they have the ugly gray on the inside. I was going to say they usually have really beautiful end papers, but anyway, they're crazy, those people. The other part of this that's autobiographical, and not very interesting, I'm sure, is I joined the new audiobook company. It's fairly new, 2 years old, Spiracle, and I joined it for about 4 or 5 months before I realized that I was buying books or getting books with my subscription and not having time to get to them. And once I had amassed about a half dozen or more audiobooks, I thought I'm just going to stop my membership and come back when I've listened to all these. But what I like about Spiracle is they bring old stuff into audiobook format and they bring translated lit into, and they work with small presses. So you get a lot of audiobooks there that you can't get anywhere else. So I highly recommend you checking them out. I'll put a link in the show notes, Spiracle. But then I decided at the end of last year, I think it was a month where I was unusually feeling quite flush with extra money, and so I decided to buy physical books to go with all of those Spiracle audiobooks that I had previously purchased, and that's why I got this one. I have the Spiracle audiobook, and so I'll do an audio text combo. This has a deceptively simple plot about a deceived wife and a foolish husband. I'll read the first page, which is 3 short paragraphs of chapter 1. Widowed, in the house her husband had built with day and night nurseries and a music room, as if the children would stay there forever, instead of marrying and going off at the earliest possible moment, old Mrs. North yielded one day to a long-felt desire to provide herself with company. She answered an advertisement in the personal column of the Times. Old Mrs. North's husband had spoiled her, but now that he was dead, and her 3 children married, no one spoilt her any more. She didn't come first with anybody, and she didn't like that. She considered that a woman who had brought 3 children into the world is entitled in old age to be the object of their care and attention. What was the good of having children if half the time you never saw them? Cicely, her daughter, who might have been a comfort, had chosen to marry an American and lived in Washington, sending lavish parcels, it is true, during the war, and coming herself as soon as it was over, but going back, of course, and leaving her mother lonely as before. That is an awesome opening few paragraphs. I have had mixed results with the writing of the British writer Eley Williams. I absolutely adored her debut short story collection, Attrib and Other Stories. But I bailed on her novel, The Liar's Dictionary. And Lindy tells me I must have got up on the wrong side of the bed several days in a row to bail on such a wonderful novel, but I couldn't get into it at all. This is her latest short story collection, Moderate to Poor, Occasionally Good. Came out last year, and I'm expecting good things of this because of how much I loved Attrib. The first story is called Scrimshaw. I will read a bit. I'll stop when I think that it's got a standalone vitality, so it might be just the first paragraph plus the first short sentence, and it might go on past that. And I can tell from the opening line that this is the Eley Williams that I have read and loved. Not knowing what else to do, I send you walruses. It's an online feed maintained by the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, with cameras trained on a state sanctuary 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The caption claims that what you're looking at is one of the largest gathering places in the world for Pacific walruses. If the season's right, you can watch 15,000 walruses rolling about and sunning themselves, puffy and hairy and taking stock of their walrus days. It's a go-to site for me, bookmarked and ready for whenever insomnia has me in its jaws. There is audio, too. One cursor nudge and your speakers thrum with huffing and wuffing, mustachio blurts and blusterings of never-footed scuffling, all in real time. That is wonderful. Next is a work of nonfiction by Helen Humphreys, a Canadian-British author whose recent novels I have disliked, sadly, because I loved her earlier fiction, but I've loved all of her nonfiction. This one, I don't remember when it came out, but it's a hand-me-down from my mom, actually, Field Study. Meditations on a Year at the Herbarium. Published 2021. I think the title is quite self-explanatory, and it's printed on glossy paper with lots of gorgeous illustrations. And Helen Humphreys is an amazing writer. I just haven't been able to follow her into her recent novels, but all of her nonfiction is to die for. I'll read the opening paragraph from the introduction, which is also gorgeously illustrated, and that's not coming into focus. But anyway, here it is. The autumn leaves floating down over the field look like brightly colored birds falling to earth. We have just left the pine wood and are on the path that my walking companion calls Carnage Alley, because there are often feathers or blood or bits of dead animal on this route. The victims of coyotes, perhaps, or the owls that hunt above this field at dusk. Easier to catch something in the open than in the tangled rack of forest trees, and even now there is a northern harrier skimming the tops of the asters and milkweed. We always consider it lucky to see the harrier, so we stop to watch its low, silent glide. It seems otherworldly, an owl's head on a hawk's body, the elegant drift of its hunger. Next is another novel that's been brought back into print via the Women's Writers series of the British Library, and I love these because they're so beautiful. It's called Sally on the Rocks, Winifred Boggs, but I kind of hate them too because the font is so small that I end up buying an ebook so that I can actually read it, but they're just gorgeous. Sally on the Rocks by Winifred Boggs was first published in 1915, and this British Library reprint is 2021. Winifred Boggs died in 1931, and she was about 55 or something. Little is known about her. She wrote about a dozen novels, but some were under her name, Winifred Boggs, and others by a pseudonym, but not much else is known about her. The eponymous protagonist, Sally, is on the rocks and in search of a husband as the First World War grips Europe. There is a epigraph that is not attributed to anyone, so that possibly means it was penned by Winifred Boggs herself. Wealth lost, something lost. Honor lost, much lost. Courage lost, all lost. I had a bite-sized book chat with Liddy from Ipswich, England, years ago. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. I'll read the first 4 paragraphs because they're very short from Chapter 1. And Chapter 1 is entitled, The New Bank Manager is a Bachelor and Simply Rolling. The successful little Cramptonian is born, not made, as strangers coming to the place soon found to their cost. For even the Cramptonians themselves had to be careful, on account of Miss Maggie Hopkins. The white flower of a blameless life availed you little. Sooner or later, Miss Maggie got hold of it, threw it in the mud, said in effect, "Just look at this beastly thing," and held it up to the shocked gaze of the neighborhood. I'm already in love with Miss Maggie. Most people have something they would prefer to keep to themselves. Not so much sin as folly, some miniature skeleton. Whatever it was, Miss Maggie, with her gimlet eyes and corkscrew methods, got it out of you. It was she who discovered within 3 days that the new doctor and his wife had emerged from shops, and Mrs. Hill, who was given to what is called swank, had to walk humbly in Little Crampton thereafter. Miss Maggie also discovered, though this took longer, that the lawyer's new wife, who seemed so modest and quiet, had once kicked a lavish leg before the footlights. I don't think I understood all that, but I loved it. The new doctor and his wife had emerged from shops. I think that means that they were former shopkeepers. Oh, that's quite lovely. I just love that. Here is a hand-me-down from my dear friend and former prof, Kathy. And one of many. They've been showing up willy-nilly in recent book hauls. This is Amelia by Henry Fielding, which is an 18th century text. Another whopper. It's in very tiny print. It's almost 600 pages. And it's his last novel. I'm not going to look up when it was published, but sometime in the 18th century. And According to the Penguin blurb here, it's a move away from the comic style towards a more subtle analysis of contemporary social ills. The first paragraph is quite long in chapter 1. The title, if it's a title, is Containing the Exordium, etc. I'll have to look up what an exordium is, but here is the opening paragraph. And 18th century prose, you have to kind of get used to it. The various accidents which befell a very worthy couple, after their uniting in the state of matrimony, will be the subject of the following history. The distresses which they waded through were some of them so exquisite, and the incidents which produced these so extraordinary, that they seem to require not only the utmost malice, but the utmost invention, which superstition hath ever attributed to fortune. Though whether any such being interfered in the case, or indeed whether there be any such being in the universe, is a matter which I by no means presume to determine in the affirmative. I just love that. To speak a bold truth, I am, after much mature deliberation, inclined to suspect that the public voice hath in all ages done much injustice to fortune, and hath convicted her of many facts in which she had not the least concern. I question much whether we may not by natural means account for the success of knaves, the calamities of fools, with all the miseries in which men of sense sometimes involve themselves by quitting the directions of prudence, and following the blind guidance of a predominant passion. In short, for all the ordinary phenomena which are imputed to fortune, whom, perhaps, men accuse with no less absurdity in life than a bad player complains of ill luck at the game of chess. I just love that. Okay, here's a point of personal privilege book in my book haul. As we're closing down the farm, or at least sorting out a bunch of stuff, I retrieved this. This is an anthology of horse stories for girls. It's called Everygirls Horse Stories, and it's by Marion, Holland, J.P. Folinsbee, Janet Lambert, Adele, Deleeuw, and others. And it was published by Lantern Press in New York in 1956. And the second author named there, it's an anthology, J.P. Folinsbee, was my uncle. He was my dad's oldest sister's first husband, and he died of a massive heart attack at the age of 35 or something in 1955. So this was a posthumous publication. And I've never read it, or I don't remember, so I want to. And I want to know more about my Uncle Pat, who died 11 years before I was born and adopted into that family. And so this is one of the books I'm adding to my collection. The story by Uncle Pat, J.P. Folinsbee, is the second story, and it's called Storm. I don't know if I'm going to like his writing, and I probably wouldn't be able to be objective. My Aunt Mar went on to marry and have a 30-year marriage with her second husband, and she's been dead for 15 years or something. But anyway, this is the uncle I never knew who was a writer. I'll read you the first 3 paragraphs of Storm. It was not yet daybreak. Laurie closed the screen door softly behind her and looked up, searching at the sky. The morning star still glittered on the horizon, and the black chain of mountains to the west was just beginning to be gold-tipped by the unborn sun. She shivered and put up the collar of her jacket. At least there was no threat of impending rain. All through yesterday's downpour, Storm had grown worse, as though the dampness had seeped into his bones and sent new waves of chill racing through him. The thought brought back into sharp focus the frightening dream that had awakened her. It was better not to think about it. She had dreamed that Storm, fully saddled, had been running endlessly, desperately, through sheets of torrential rain. She had been running after him, calling and calling, but he had not heard. And at last he had been swallowed in mist, and she had fallen, only to waken in the dark. That's quite lovely. J.P. Pat Folinsbee didn't ever write a book, didn't ever get a book published. He wrote lots of articles for magazines, especially Coronet magazine, which was the shape and size of a Reader's Digest. And there's a whole bunch of those at the farm, too, that I'm going to bring into my own library. And wrote some short stories. I don't know if all of them were for children, but this one certainly is, and I thought that was quite lovely prose. I'm going to add 2 more, because once I edit this out, it's going to be shorter. So instead of a dozen, it's going to be 14. I have so many books to get to. The next one happens to be the very next book for my Patreon book club. We're doing it at the first second Saturday in March or something, and that's why I bought it. And it's a Japanese novel written by a Japanese-American writer, The Thorn Puller by Hiromi Ito, and translated from the Japanese by Jeffrey Engels, published by Stonebridge Press in 2022. I don't even remember how I heard about this, but anyway, Hiromi Ito relocated to the US in the 1990s, but was already quite prominent in the Japanese literary scene for her poetry in the 80s about pregnancy, childbirth, and female sexuality. And she still writes in Japanese, but has been in America since the 90s. The female protagonist is juggling the absurdities, complexities, and challenges faced by a Japanese-American woman dealing with her caring for her husband and daughters in California and her aging parents in Japan. The first line of the translator's introduction describes Hiromi Ito as one of Japan's most prominent women writers. I had never heard of her, but that doesn't mean very much. I'll read the opening page in a bit, which should be a good setup. The title is Ito Returns to Japan and Finds Herself in a Real Pinch. This may be autofiction. Mum's question came at me through the phone. When are you coming back to Japan? Not this month, Mum. I've got too much going on. Okay, I guess it's a good thing you're busy, she said. But I'll come in August. I call my parents every other day from the States, but sometimes I'll wait an extra day to get Mum to pick up the phone and call me. If I'm the only one who does the calling, I'm afraid she'll forget how to call me if there's an emergency. When are you coming to Japan again? She asked me this question only 2 days after I told her I'd be going in August. Remember, I told you, I won't be visiting this month, Mum. Too much work here. Okay, I guess it's a good thing you're busy. But I'll be back in August. Then 3 days later. When are you coming home again? August, I told her. Say, are you asking because there's something you want me to do? In April, she'd done the same thing, asking me over and over when I'd be back. When I tried to figure out why, she admitted, well, it's no big deal, really, but I'd like you to go to the post office for me. So when I went home a month later, I went to the post office. This time, too, she said, it's no big deal, really, but I'd like you to go with me to the hospital. The other day I went to a surgeon to talk about my varicose veins, and he told me an operation would help. Next time you're home, I want you to go with me and hear what he's got to say. No hurry. Next time. He said it can wait until September. All right, I pulled right into that. Here is a Saskatchewan novel that I gave my mum as a Christmas present in 2022, I think. And my mum doesn't keep her books, so I got it later. Got it quite fairly recently, hand-me-down. So it's great to buy my mum books for Christmas or her birthday, because I get them eventually. It's not really fair. I should probably get her something that she can keep all to herself that she doesn't want to pass down. But anyway, this is called Yes, Miss Thompson by Amy Boyes. Beautiful cover. Look at that. That is a Saskatchewan scene. I think it's her debut. It must have been Christmas 2023, because it was published in 2023. And Amy Boyes lives in Warman, Saskatchewan, which is near Saskatoon. She's also a music teacher. Oh, and she has had another book published in 2019 called Micro Miracle. But this is a novel set in Manitoba, maybe, in 1904. A plain, outspoken Yorkshire schoolgirl, Marjorie Thompson, immigrates with her rambunctious family to Canada. Mum really enjoyed it. So I'm going to read it and hopefully get Amy Boyes on my channel. There is a family tree that the print is far too small for me to read, but maybe I'll photocopy it in the largest size paper so I can read it. And there's an epigraph that's not credited, so it might be by the author for part 1. When as a child I laughed and wept, time crept. I'll read the first page, and it's set in 2018. It's called Amy's Story, December 26, 2018, near Pilot Mound, Manitoba. Amy is 33. A ground drift rolls over the farmland, blurring the fields under waves of snow. Unlike endless ocean currents, these waves keep their shape, cold and crusty ridges rising through canola stubble as far as the eye can see, which isn't very far today. The horizon is obscured, half by blowing snow, half by low clouds resembling gray smears from a painter's thumb across a canvas. I drive slowly, unsure where the gravel ends and the ditch begins. I may be driving my father's Ford 150, but I have no desire to test its off-road capabilities. Winter visits to Manitoba are never my favorite. Blizzards, extreme cold, crowded airports, cranky toddler. Manitoba is much more enjoyable in summer, when prairie skies are clear and fields are lush with crops. We're not cooped up then, sustained by Scrabble and drugstore Christmas chocolates. The best ones gone, second layer and all. As I drive, I note small changes since my last visit. My cousin has constructed grain bins, 50,000 bushels, metal monstrosities lined up in a row. A neighbor has bulldozed a row of aging trees into a twisted mass. He'll likely burn them come spring. Another neighbor has built a house outside a shelter belt. The newly planted trees surrounding it are mere saplings. These changes reflect progress, financial health even. But mostly, everything is the same as it was during my childhood. Flat fields, surveyed into grids, lie buried under the snow. Farmyards, or the remnants of homesteads, dot the horizon. Pine trees planted a lifetime ago peek cautiously above the ground drift, as if to check conditions. Still blowing? They seem to ask. I think that's quite lovely writing, and I'm just really intrigued to get into this. And finally, here is a book that I have this idea that I'm going to teach myself how to restore ex-library books into looking like brand new books, especially when I get them for $1 and it looks like nobody's ever read them. And here is one by Cynthia Ozick, who I've been hearing about since at least the 80s, and she's not only still with us, but still publishing. And oh god, I can't stand it when libraries do this, but they've put the sticker right over the title. It's called Antiquities by Cynthia Ozick, and I'm going to put it down and put up the cover gift. But I'm going to teach myself, because if I can get those stickers off and whatnot, this will look like a brand new book. As I said, I've never read anything by Cynthia Ozick. This is a work of fiction. I guess it's a novel or a novella called Antiquities, and I'll put the GIF up. This is published in 2023, I believe. The novel is a fictional memoir by one of the 7 elderly trustees of a academy for boys that has been defunct for 30 plus years. And it's in the first person, and I'll read the opening paragraph. My name is Lloyd Wilkinson Petrie, and I write on the 30th of April 1949 at the behest of the trustees of the Temple Academy for Boys, an institution that saw its last pupil 34 years ago. I must unfortunately report that of the remaining trustees, only 7 of 25 survive. Though well advanced in age myself, I am the youngest, and the least infirm, but for a tremor of the right hand, yet capable enough at my Remington, despite long years of dependence on my secretary, Miss Margaret Stimmer, now deceased. In our continuing capacity of trustees, we meet irregularly, contingent on health, here in my study, with its mullioned windows looking out on our old maples, newly in leaf. Look, think I like that? I'm not sure. I'd have to read a few more paragraphs. And that is my big book haul, the first one of 2025. Which one of these would you be most likely to pick up and read first? Thanks for watching.